Beautiful.
Okay. This workshop is called Learning from the Women in Matthew's Genealogy of Jesus. And if I tell you the very first thing I learned editing this study, it was how to spell the word genealogy. It has an A. So there we go, Matthew's Genealogy of Jesus. We'll be using this flyer, well, you can use this flyer. It's a basic information about the study, but we will be using the dramatic reading. And Sarah Lee, could you copy and paste that into the chat? Or you're not probably co-leadering yet. I'll do that. But that is a reading from Ruth. And then as you've probably all become very good at this week is to use the chat feature if you have questions, or raise your hand and we'll do our best to see your virtual hand. Translation has been requested for this workshop, Spanish translation. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a place where you can choose your language. And if everyone will do that, either English or Spanish, then the folks who are hearing in Spanish will be able to have the participate fully. So that will help us all. And if you check your name and rename yourself, just in case your puppy's name is on your video screen, that would be helpful. All right. Welcome to Presbyterian Women. Many of you I know Presbyterian Women. But Presbyterian Women is the women's organization of the Presbyterian Church USA. And if you're a Presbyterian woman, you're in Presbyterian Women. And so that's a helpful thing. The PW purpose guides the work that Presbyterian women that we do together. And I've printed the purpose here. Forgiven and freed by God in Jesus Christ and empowered by the Holy Spirit, we commit ourselves to nurture our faith through prayer and Bible study, support the mission of the church worldwide, work for justice and peace, and build an inclusive, caring community of women that strengthens the PCUSA and witnesses to the promise of God's kingdom. So we try to guide everything we do by the purpose. And today we're concentrating on the nurturing our faith through prayer and Bible study. Presbyterian Women publishes a magazine and a Bible study, and we hope there are resources that help you live full lives of faith. Recent studies you might have seen include Into the Light. See, I've lost my cursor. There we go. A Love Carved in Stone, God's Promise, Cloud of Witnesses, Community of Christ in Hebrews. And our newest study to be published in March is What My Grandmothers Taught Me, Learning from the Women in Matthew's Genealogy of Jesus. And today, zooming in from Melbourne, Australia, where it's 5:30 in the morning, is Meryl Blair. Meryl met Susan Jackson Dowd when Susan was in Australia for an ecumenical women's conference. Meryl was leading workshops there. And one thing led to another, and Meryl submitted a proposal about 4 years ago that was chosen by the committee of the Bible Study Committee of the Presbyterian Women Board of Directors. And then we take 3 years to write a draft, field test that draft, use those results to make any changes that are requested or suggested, and then to publish a study that we hope that process makes it of and for Presbyterian women at each step along the way. And so Meryl, I will tell you a little bit about her. God has gently nudged Meryl Blair in interesting directions throughout her working life. She's been a nurse, a youth minister, an Old Testament lecturer, and that's probably not the normal career path, but it sounds similar to some I've heard from you. For 25 years, she has served as senior lecturer in Old Testament at Stirling Theological College that is part of the University of Divinity in Melbourne, Australia. She and her late husband, Graham, also taught during their sabbaticals at North Rise University in southern Zambia. Meryl has represented Churches of Christ in Australia on ecumenical councils at state, national, and international levels. And indeed, this is where in one of these events where she met Susan Jackson Dowd, the Associate Director of PW. Meryl is passionate about the power of story to engage and open the imagination. Meryl's long journey with the Old Testament story never ceases to surprise and challenge her, and she loves to share this with others. Well, Meryl, we're looking forward to spending time with you, learning more about the women in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. And let me just say how thrilled I am to be here with you all. I'm really excited to have been chosen to offer these studies and the opportunity it gives to talk to wonderful people like you. Talk with, not talk to. I'm going to do a very little bit of talking to, and then we're going to do this together. But let me just give you a little introduction of why I do what I do and what we're going to do, so to speak. First of all, my dad was a minister, and when I was quite young, probably about 11 or 12, I remember him saying to me, "Everyone has a story worth hearing." He used to take me around to visit some of the old people from the church and say, "Listen to what they know about the history of this place." And very excited he would get about all of these things. So I'm really privileged that I was brought up to love people's stories. I think everyone has one, and how we hear our own stories and other people's stories helps shape us. We also choose which stories we live out of, and we can choose to live out of the nourishing stories or the destructive stories, because often the stories that we have are also destructive. So, how do we find those that nurture us? How do we listen to the voices of the past that send forward the warmth and the love that helps us grow? And how are we going to be those voices to the future? So, how will we be the wise grandmothers, if you like, of the faith? My other fascination, which came out of that, I think, is for Hebrew storytelling. I fell in love with the Old Testament when I was first studying for my degree in theology, and it was the frayed edges, the lovely messiness of the story of people who are struggling, getting it wrong, getting it right, picking themselves up, dusting themselves off, starting all over again, and the way that God was so intimately involved in all of that with its struggle. So I discovered a book when it came out in 1984, which turned the light on for me. It was a book by a man called Robert Alter. I don't know, have any of you read Robert Alter's works? Yep. I see some hands. Marvelous, absolutely marvelous. So his first book was called, his first book about this was called The Art of Biblical Narrative. He was a professor of English literature, and he was steeped in the storytelling traditions of Greek narrative and how that informed English narrative. And he started thinking, why do my own stories not sound quite the same? So he started looking at how Hebrew narrative works. And of course, it comes from oral tradition. So storytellers, professional storytellers, would sit around and tell the stories, beautifully composed stories, to inform people, but also to shape people. because it's hearing the stories of our ancestors that reminds us of who we are and helps form us. So he looked at things like repetition. And when we're sitting in church and listening to Bible readings, the Old Testament readings often just sound very repetitious to us. And we tend to just get little snippets. We don't get whole narratives. And he points out that the repetition is doing something which, when we read, we would flick our eyes back up to see, oh, what happened there again? I've forgotten about that. What happened? We can't do that when we're listening. And so it would be repeated. And so looking for repetition tells us what the main point is, helps us know what the important themes are. I've learnt to read with a highlighter in one hand. And when words start popping out over and over again, I dab the highlighter on. At the end, I hold it out and I look for all the little colours, and you can see the pattern of the narrative. You can see what's important and how you're led through. Very exciting. He also looked at all of the normal things that we do look for when we're reading. We don't know we're looking for them a lot of the time, but we do. How do we get to know the characters? And he suggested that we get to know them pretty much like we get to know people. We see them, we look at what they look like, we have some idea sometimes, not so much these days as maybe people used to, of what their relationships are around them. We hear what they say, we might hear what someone else says about them. And all of these things have varying degrees of accuracy, because we can make snap judgments about people and then find out we're completely wrong. Or we can hear what someone says about someone, it can really colour the way we think. And then gradually we can discover that that person's quite different. And Alter suggests that this happens when we read the biblical characters as well. So when we read these things and when we sort of get to know what it is that we're reading and we let the story be the wonderful, rich, beautifully composed story that it is, it comes to life. I think it gets killed way too often by being sort of read in a dull monotone. And as I said, often just one little bit taken out of context. So I would like us to have a play with a bit of the story at the moment. I've chosen one chapter of one little story because we haven't got much time. And so we're going to have a look at chapter 2 of Ruth. And what I've done is make this into a dramatic reading, because Ruth is, I could talk for hours about the book of Ruth. I think it's one of the most gloriously composed pieces of literature. It's so carefully written. And in my mind, it's always a play, because almost, I think 80% of it is narrative. Not narrative, sorry, dialogue, with just little bits of narrative linking things together. So I always see it as a set of scenes. Each chapter is a different scene. And chapter 2 is a scene which is very much out there. It's in the fields. There's lots of light. There's lots of movement. Probably it's quite hot. It's probably more like where I am at the moment than where you are at the moment. I heard someone talking about snow a while ago. Snow? Can't even imagine. So, does everybody have access to this? If anybody doesn't, what I might do is just share my screen. Actually, before I even do that, I want to show you that. Sorry, let me just find what it is I'm trying to share at the moment. Now, can you see that? Yes, excellent. So this is the artwork from the studies for the book of, for the particular chapter of the first two chapters of Ruth. And there's a narrative going on in there. So we see two women walking together. We see them with bare feet, which I think is a lovely touch because there's a great vulnerability about that. It also suggests a degree of poverty. So two women making their way along a path. One of them is carrying a very heavy load, the younger one. The older one has a stick to help her along. I'd love to know what's going on with the tortoise. I've got to think about the tortoise. There's a frog looking. And there's a butterfly to the side, which is an artistic interpretation of something that I've been wondering about. I'm not sure whether it's hope or the wisdom that flutters through or the transformation. I suspect it's got something about transformation in it. So I've been very intrigued by the artwork that will come out. I just wanted to show that to you before I share the actual dialogue. So let me just share this in case anybody hasn't got access to it. Now, what we need are some readers. So I need some people to volunteer to be part of the drama. I'll take the narrator, but would somebody like to do Ruth? Someone like to unmute themselves and be Ruth? Do we have a Ruth?
I'll be Ruth, Priscilla.
Yay, we have a Ruth. Thank you, Priscilla. Do we have a Naomi?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, so somebody said
Kathy.
yes. Kathy, right, lovely. Who'd like to be Boaz? Who's got anyone with a deep voice? Who knows what Boaz's voice was like? Do whatever you like. Got a Boaz?
This is Sarah Lee. I'll be Boaz.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Sarah Lee. And then we just have one servant who has a speaking part, an overseer.
I can read for the servant.
Lovely, thank you. The rest of you will just have to be sundry reapers and maidservants in the background. But while we're doing that, one of the things I would like you to do, and if you've got it, got the paper there in front of you, maybe if you've got a highlighter or even a biro where you can scribble and underline and or just take some notes on the way through, what I want you to do is look at Ruth. And as we read, what are you seeing? What are the sources of information? What are we being told about her by the narrator, by what other people say about her, by how she's acting herself, by her own words? What do we get to know about Ruth in this chapter? Pretend you've never met this woman before in your life. You don't know the rest of the story. You're just looking at her through what happens in this chapter. You might also just find yourself drawn to various words that just keep popping up. So perhaps just think a little bit about, are there any words that you might dab with your little bit of highlighter or draw a ring around with your biro, because they feel like they're important. Maybe they get repeated, they pop up in particular times that draw your attention. So in other words, as you listen to it being read, really pay close attention to this wonderful little bit of drama. Okay, are we ready? Are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin. Now, Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi,
Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose sight I may find favor.
Go, my daughter.
So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Just then, Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers,
The Lord be with you.
"The Lord, everybody, the Lord
Lord
bless
bless you.
you." Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers,
To whom does this young woman belong?
She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came, and she has been on her feet from early this morning until now, without resting even for a moment.
Then Boaz said to Ruth,
Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that's being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn.
Then she fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to him,
Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?
All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge.
May I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants.
At mealtime, Boaz said to her,
Come here and eat some of this bread and dip your morsel in the sour wine.
So she sat beside the reapers, and he heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men.
Let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her.
So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. She picked it up and came into the town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gleaned. Then she took out and gave her what was left over after she herself had been satisfied. Her mother-in-law said to her,
Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you.
So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, Ruth? We've lost Ruth.
I'll read for Ruth. The name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz.
Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law,
Blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. The man is a relative of ours, one of our nearest kin.
Then Ruth the Moabite said,
He even said to me, stay close by my servants until they have finished all my harvest.
Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law,
It is better, my daughter, that you go out with his young woman. Otherwise, you might be bothered in another field.
So she stayed close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So the question is, what do we know about Ruth from this chapter? I'm going to stop sharing for the moment. So who'd like to bring up some of the things that your group noticed?
We said she must have had a lot of confidence, first of all, to go into a foreign country, and then to be brave enough to go to this unknown kinsman.
Yeah, and one of the things that one of our group brought up was how much was made of what danger she was in. Because it's repeated a couple of times by Boaz and also by Naomi. And the young men are told in no uncertain terms, hands off. And so the danger was very real, yes. So a courageous woman.
Another thing I found interesting is the narrator's attempt to reinforce this idea that Boaz is tied to a lineage, whereas Ruth is tied to a region, because they keep saying Boaz from the Elimelech family versus Ruth the Moabite. And so this othering of women being not tied to a family lineage so much as an othering of a region, it was just kind of interesting.
Really important, because usually women are tied to a man. Think of Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, which is exactly how she's named in the genealogy in Matthew. So Ruth the Moabite, I have counted at some stage how often that's used throughout the book of Ruth, and I'm not good at numbers, I never remember numbers. But in this particular one, 1, 2, 3, 4 times, 3 times Ruth the Moabite, once from the country of Moab, and once I am a foreigner. In Hebrew, anything repeated is worth looking at. If it's repeated, if it's mentioned 3 times, it's key. If it's mentioned more than 3 times, we're having our noses rubbed in it. So there's something about the foreignness of Ruth that is a really, really important concept. And it's stressed over and over and over through the book of Ruth. And a Moabite. Ooh, we hate the Moabites. Horrible people. The Hebrews told all sorts of jokes against the Moabites. Sort of think of the sort of racist jokes that go around at different times. Theirs were Moabite jokes. So why is it being stressed over and over again? Ruth the Moabite is a question that has to go through our minds as we read. More from you.
Our group noticed that she's called daughter too a number of times, but the most interesting one to us was that Boaz refers to her. Now listen, my daughter. So I don't want to overstress him already adopting her in this way, especially since he eventually marries her instead. But that was striking to us, and also that Naomi clearly has moved from daughter-in-law to daughter, because she refers to her as daughter. Absolutely.
And there are nice little bookends. Naomi at the beginning says, "Go, my daughter," and at the end she calls her my daughter again. And they make a nice little bracket of the whole thing. And daughter-in-law, mother-in-law, the very last word, she lived with her mother-in-law. She told her mother-in-law, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. So while you've got Ruth the Moabite and the foreignness on one hand, there's this lovely tension being built up with these strong family relationships being stressed as well. So what's going on there, we have to wonder. You know, what is the narrator, or what is the storyteller trying to set up in our minds? Maybe holding up our prejudices on one side and holding up family stories on the other and saying, what's happening, people? You know, these are done on purpose. They're too beautifully composed to be accidental. Lovely, lovely stuff. So really well spotted. Keep going.
We talked about in our group how strong Ruth was, that she was used to hard work and just jumped right in and did as she was instructed and seemed to know what to do.
Indeed. And in fact, isn't it interesting that when we first see her in this chapter, she's the one who comes up with the idea of going and gleaning. So she's proactive in that. And the servant's description of her, did you notice, first the servant says she's a foreigner, and we know she came back from this foreign country, but then look at her. And I was saying how much I love the description. She's been on her feet from early this morning until now without resting even for a moment. It's not just she's a hard worker. He draws a picture of what that hard work feels like. Your feet ache as you read it. She's been on her feet without resting even for a moment. And then, of course, we go on that she gleaned in the field until evening. And so we know by the end that she's been there from early in the morning until it's getting dark. Yes, she's a hard worker.
Well, our group talked about the humility, kind of this unassuming nature. She questions, why have I found favor in your sight? She calls herself a servant throughout the passage.
Yes. Now, there's a nice little, did you notice how often whose sight I might finding favor in the sight pops up? 3 times. So what did I say about important points? She starts off, let me go and glean behind someone in whose sight I might find favor. And then she says to Boaz, why have I found favor in your sight? And then she says, may I continue to find favor in your sight? We can go past that and just think, oh, they're saying it again. You've already said this. Or we can realize there's something important going on here. The word favor in Hebrew, chen, has a very, it can simply mean the graciousness of someone wealthy towards someone poorer. But there's something in the book of Ruth that gives it a more theological sort of theme, because another word that pops up, which was translated here as kindness, Naomi says, blessed be he by the Lord whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. That word is chesed, and that is steadfast love. Think of the Psalms, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. God doesn't get a lot of a look in the book of Ruth, except by these words. And it's that sense of when people act with this towards each other, God's work is being done. So why have I found chen in your sight is actually saying that here is someone who is looking on me, lowly as I am, with the kind of care that God would give. So it's really drawing something out of what this interaction is doing, as far as taking this person who is an outsider, a foreigner, poor. When she prostrates herself with her face to the ground, that was not normal practice. You only prostrated yourself before a king. So I had this feeling, this is my idea, I have no idea if anyone else agrees with me or not, I don't care, that she's actually illustrating to Boaz what her position is in their society. Dust, dirt. And she's making it very clear to Boaz that he has a choice to make here. He can either leave her as dirt or he can do something different. And I also wonder whether Ruth's being really, really clever, because she's actually forcing him to go beyond just saying, oh, well done, that person over there, be of good cheer, and put some skin on it. And so the next thing he does is feed her. And the fact that he brings her into his circle and feeds her is actually making a statement to the people around that she is under his protection. So at this stage, from this stage on, Ruth is no longer just a foreigner. She is at the very least part of Boaz's circle of care. And he's a wealthy landowner. He's got a big wide circle of care, but you don't mess with Ruth without messing with Boaz. He didn't have to marry her. He's already done enough. So in fact, when we get into the rest of the story, Boaz is going over and above. Just as Ruth could have done enough as her sister-in-law did, but she went over and above. So it's very much a story of people who can be good people and do a reasonable minimum, or people who actually choose to really put themselves over the line into something much, much deeper and bigger. Anyway, sorry, I'll start lecturing. I'll stop lecturing. Over to you again. What else have you noticed?
So I'm wondering if, because she went over the top in her behavior and her actions and her obedience, it really led, even though, yes, she was being clever, but it also led Boaz to do the same. He went over, it sort of parallels their behaviors.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Absolutely. Yeah, he rises to meet.
Yes, yeah, but I'm wondering, it's a good example for us. I mean, how, in terms of our witness to obedience and faithfulness, or maybe more so God's example to us. He exceedingly loves us. He extravagantly loves us the way Boaz did for her.
That's a beautiful thought. I just had a moment flash into my mind of standing in St. Peter's Square in Rome, listening to the Pope speak when I was there. I'm part of the international dialogue between our church here and, or Disciples of Christ, actually. So most of you will be aware of Disciples of Christ and the Roman Catholic Church. And we've met in Rome a couple of times, and we were meant to meet the Pope. And I missed it by that much because he was not feeling well. So he only met the leaders of our group, but we were very close. We were very close. And I had someone translating in my ear his sermon from Italian. And I was struck by, he was saying, we must step across that line to meet people where they are because God has already done it for us. And it was just the simplest message, and it was so profound. And coming from this particular Pope and the way he has consistently done that, it really hit me. And I think that's what you're saying. Ruth stepped across and Boaz steps across in response. And through all of this, it's made quite clear that this is people acting in a godly way.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not trying to say that it's because of her works she was loved, because that's not why we're justified by our faith, not by our works, but at the same time, the extravagant of it, there's something beautiful about it. I don't know.
Well, there is, absolutely. And it's what is seen about her, isn't it? So if we're seeing this person, we see her through other people's eyes. And it's as if the servant has been reluctantly convinced. First thing he sees, she's a foreigner. But then he watches what she's doing and he's going, wow, he can't help but admire. And you hope that his prejudices have been undermined by what he's seen. Whereas Boaz doesn't seem to have terribly many of those, or if he did, what he's heard has already undermined them, because he starts off with, I've heard what you've done. And now I see it for myself and wow, some woman. I do like his comment there, may you have a full reward from the Lord, under whose wings you have come for refuge. And Ruth then kind of says, I like to think something along the lines of, that's good, but whose wings am I actually, who's God going to work through to make that happen? And I think in the next chapter, the little dim, dark, midnight sort of story of chapter 3, she's really pushing Boaz to say, well, if God is going to give me protection, that protection needs to look like something, and it needs to work for not just me, but also my mother-in-law. And so he spreads his cloak. So if God spreads his wings, Boaz needs to spread his cloak to make that clear. So it's a good question. Oh gosh, they're telling us that this session is scheduled to end soon.
Yes.
Time always goes too fast. Any quick final comments that people would love to say as things that they've seen that they hadn't noticed before?
I thought it was really good to hear some things that I had thought before put into words. Because sometimes we kind of have an idea, and then to hear somebody else say them, that really matters. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Now, those thoughts that you have when you read something, the sort of things that feel like hunches, that's when you come and look really carefully at the language that's being used, because I have a theory that you're meant to feel that way. And if you look at the rhetoric and the way that the words are organised and the way you're led through, these are very, very clever writers. I think they're leading us to where they want us to be. And so I encourage my students that if you're having some sort of gut reaction to something, or you're seeing something in your mind as you're reading, look really carefully and see what it is about the words that are being used that's leading you there. And have confidence in your own readings. You've all got the skills for this. Could I just end, before they shut us out, or whatever they do here, could I end in a prayer? If we had time, I would have done a little bit of a workshop of a Ruth prayer, but we haven't really got time. So I've written one of my own that came to me as I was reading through this yet again yesterday. So let me just share this with you. God of the hungry and the full, the barren and the fruitful, help us not to define ourselves or others by such opposites, but to be open to the needs and the gifts in each other and in ourselves. And with Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, may we cooperate with your loving creativity to bring all around us and within us into fruitfulness. Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you so much for being part of this. It's just been a huge joy for me, way over here on the other side of the world, different hemisphere, different season, and how lovely to see you all.
Thank
Meryl,
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Meryl.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everyone, remember to
Thank
please
you.
complete the survey. You have the link in your chat. And thank you, Meryl, so much.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Thank you.
Betsy.
you.
Betsy, we
Thank you.
really thank
Yeah.
Betsy.
Oh, thank you.
Betsy.
Oh,
Thank you
and
all
I
for
was just
coming.
going to. I was just going to say quickly, if anyone has any further questions or comments, feel free to email me. I'm always happy to answer emails.
Thank
And
you.
I mean, wouldn't you say that the rest of the, it seems to me that in the rest of the study, we find in each woman that she brings, just as Ruth did, so much that then becomes an important part of the whole genealogy. That what is
Absolutely.
this? We talk about, well, what did Jesus learn? What did we learn from these women, and why are they part of Jesus's genealogy? And then what does that mean to us when we think about being faithful people?
Yep. What about their story informs our story that we can choose to live out and to pass down?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's seen here too, in each person here.
Absolutely.
Thanks for
Thank you
coming.
so much, Meryl.
Blessings on the rest
Thank
of
you,
your
Betsy.
conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Dee.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Sarah Lee, thank you for your
Well,
help.
for what it
Thank you,
was
Sarah
worth.
Lee.
Oh, plenty.
Thanks, Sarah Lee.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks, Sarah Lee.
you.
Well, we,
Hey, Betsy. It's Beth.
Hey.
you're good.
Anybody have any questions? Hi, Beth.
Yes, I don't know whether we can stay around and chat for a little while or whether you have to race off to the next thing.
Betsy, I would love to talk some more with you about, obviously I work mostly with children, but occasionally I get to help with picking adult studies. And I'm just doing a lot of thinking, in the wondering phase of this leads me, of course, to think about godly play and how we, talk about these stories with our children. And I'm just wondering, I heard a lot of what we talked about today as, sort of the morals that we can pull from these stories. But, I'm also trying to point to where is God at work in this story, because that's really what I want to point to. And so I'd love to explore a little bit about how this particular curriculum is pointing to where God is at work in the story too. Not, it's especially with children, I think we really need to be careful about not just always pointing to the moral or the behavior that we want to coax from a particular story, because that can break down pretty quickly, but really where God is at work in the story. So I would love to explore a little bit more about this particular curriculum, about where God is at work in these women in particular. So I don't know if you can speak to that in this, 30 seconds. That's kind of a tall task.
Well, I know that probably together we can definitely answer. One thing that my partner in conversation was Ruth from Hamilton, Ontario, and we talked about how the plenty, we're talking about plenty and gleaning and getting enough and all of that, but isn't that what we're learning about God? That not only how we behave and we see things, but the life God offers us is beyond full, it seems to me, and so kind of this idea with everyone that we are all enough, and so I don't know if that comes more like in how to live, Jamie, but I think anytime we can communicate that what we're offering is, more,
Yeah.
So
That's what we're hoping.
Yeah.
Another thing I think that really came through to me as I was preparing the studies and having been teaching, for so long, is that God is always at work in the unexpected places.
Right. Yeah.
And the places that we would see as not fruitful. And so I think, that's the thing that struck me most about these women. Why these women? Out of all of the women in the Bible, the great mothers, Sarah, Rachel, Rebecca, and so on and so forth, they're not there in Matthew. What's Matthew trying to say about the person of Jesus and what it means for the kingdom of God to be among you? And I think a lot of it's got to do with, we just got to open our eyes a whole lot wider and drop our barriers and see beyond. All of these women, all of these women in some way were sexual transgressors of the mores of the time. They were all, apart from Mary, and we don't know about the wife of Uriah, but Uriah was a Hittite. So the one thing we know about Uriah, like Ruth the Moabite, Uriah the Hittite was his foreigner. So we might assume that she's also a foreigner. There is, this very marginal, or even beyond the margins thing about these women, and they are the ones who are named. So what's Matthew setting up his whole gospel to say about the coming of Jesus? In other words, what is God about? And of course, so often, the first will be last, the last will be first. Throughout all of the Gospels, the Magnificat, which of course is Luke, not Matthew, but even so, picks up that wonderful sense of raising up the fallen. I think the work of God just sort of drips through the whole thing it springs out at you and goes, rah! You weren't expecting it just right there because you were looking here.
Well, Meryl, listening to you say that, it strikes me, we think of Matthew as the evangelist to the Jewish community in saying, look, this is the one you were told were coming. And yet, for him to point out the outsider,
yes,
the ones who were not the good Jewesses.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's an unexpected genealogy from someone like Matthew. Yeah, absolutely.
I love the questions that you ask, and I love when you said, let the story stand, because that's what Jerome Berryman, of course, and Sonia Stewart always said with children in worship and godly play. And I remember being in a workshop with Jerome, and when he was talking about wondering, and a woman in the group said, well, what about what I want the children to know? You could just hear the gasp.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
And he was just wonderfully, delicately, basically said, do you trust the Holy Spirit?
Yes. I don't know. Do you have a similar joke over there? Here it's based around, someone giving the children's talk in church, and they're describing what is clearly a koala. And they're saying to the children, what is this? Well, I know it's got to be Jesus, but it sounds like a koala.
Koala.
Over here,
the
Meryl,
answer's always going to be Jesus.
Over here, it's a squirrel.
Yeah, that's how I've heard it too.
Yeah. Same thing.
Yeah.
I am so grateful for this study coming because, first of all, the study we had this year on lament, God only knew that that's what we needed this year. But now the excitement of learning from these women, I'm just really excited to share that with the women in my church.
Oh, I'm so pleased.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's especially appropriate now that we have an administration in the USA that has or that is opening our borders to refugees again, and who knows what refugees we may find in our own communities in the coming few years, who would be outsiders.
Yep.
As many people would see them.
Foreigners.
Yeah, and to change, we in the privileged West think of ourselves as the givers of all good things.
Yes.
And to actually say, what gifts are we going to be given? What gifts will these people bring into our lives, rather than, no, they're going to be another drain on our resources. It's a really hard mindset to sort of swap. And I think we really need to, as I said, choose the stories we live out of. And I think these are wonderful, wonderful stories to live out of. Yep. But
And I
yes,
feel like-
trusting the Spirit. I mean, trusting the Spirit to have found the right studies for the right times.
Yeah.
Why are we always surprised? But we're always surprised.
Right. Good point.
And I think this comes back to, Jamie, what you asked at the beginning, the whole idea of letting the story stand as it is and not bringing what we think it needs to say. What is really there? And to really be able to explore it is, I think, is where we find.
I do find it fascinating that in something like the Book of Ruth, God's mentioned in the third person only. God doesn't appear as an actor on the stage. And the first time God's mentioned, he's causing mayhem. You know, there's a famine. Thanks a lot, God, you've taken everything away from me, says Naomi. Call me bitter because the Lord's, you know, and it's not till the end that there's this song of praise. And it really is in the actions of the people. And we miss it because we don't get, you know, in translation in English, the word loses its power because they use something like kindness. I'm not knocking kindness, it's a wonderful thing. But steadfast love, that loyal love that is the absolute basic attribute of God. When you see that, it should go zing, God's at work here. You know, the Hebrew audience would have got that immediately. They would have got, oh, there's something going on. Whereas we just think, oh, how nice, people are being kind. You know, it's a very different thing. So I tell everybody, you just got to go and learn Hebrew. That's the only.
Well, Mara, we are extremely grateful that you have done this work for the rest of us, so that you can lead us along as we try to be faithful on the journey.
Well, once again, I'm so thankful to you for giving me the opportunity, because this is, as you can possibly tell, where my passion lies. Do love it. It's very life-giving for me to be able to do it. So thank you so much for letting me.
Well, we're all immensely beyond grateful to Presbyterian women for finding scholars and teachers such as yourself. Always, Betsy can say, always looking, always looking.
Oh, look, when I spoke to Susan Dowden, she showed me the one, she had a sample of Horizons with her, and I've sort of clutched it ever since. I've shown it to a number of people over here who've all said, that's exactly the sort of thing we've been looking for. We've got nothing like that over here, nothing that has the high level of scholarship with the great sense of interaction at all sorts of levels, and the beautiful creative artwork as well. All of those
artwork,
things.
yes.
Isn't that
unbelievable? Yeah, just fantastic, because that's so important, I think, in interpretation as well. Yeah.
Got a strong record of that over the years with Presbyterian Women's Studies and Horizons magazine.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank
wonderful.
you, Betsy and others.
Well done. Well done is all I can say, and keep it up. Yeah.
All right.